So for this next section, we will be reading the first full paragraph on page 20, where we are talking about the new recruits. So it says, their pale, turn-up faces, their pitiful clenched hands, the fine courage of these poor devils, the desperate charges and attacks made by the poor brave wretches, who are so terrified that they dare not cry out loudly, but with battered chests and torn bellies, arms and legs only whimper softly for their mothers and cease as soon as one looks at them. So pretty much just saying they don't want to look or seem like they're being a baby in a sense. So even though they're extremely injured, they will not cry out loudly. They will only just whimper. And as soon as someone whimpers, they'll stop. Their sharp, downy, dead faces have the awful expressionness of dead children. So it kind of shows you that Paul sees these new recruits as very young children. It brings a lump into their throat to see how they go over and run and fall. So watching them get hurt and injured and killed really bothers Paul. A man would like to spank them. They are so stupid, and to take them by the arm and lead them away from here where they have no business to be. They wear gray coats and trousers and boots, but for most of them, the uniform is far too big. It hangs on their limbs. Their shoulders are too narrow, their bodies too tight. No uniform was ever made to see these childish measurements. So he's saying they have these very young boys who are fighting in war, and they're almost drowning in their suits. So kind of in a sense, Paul is saying it's not right to have kids this young fighting in a war. Between 5 and 10 recruits fall to every old hand. So he's saying for one old person, 5 to 10 recruits die. A surprise gas attack carries off a lot of them. They have not learned what to do. We found one dugout full of them, with blue heads and black lips. Some of them in a shell hole took off their mask too soon. They did not know that the gas lies longest in the hollows. When they saw others on top without masks, they pulled theirs off too and swallowed enough to scorch their lungs. So in this part, he's saying he comes across a hole in the ground and sees it full of recruits, young recruits who had died from gas. And he was saying how they don't realize that the gas, if you're in a hole, the gas will linger in the hole longer than it would just on the ground. They did not realize that. They took their mask off and held the gas, and then they were unable to breathe, and then they died. Their condition was hopeless. They choked to death with hemorrhages and suffocation. In one part of the trench, I suddenly run into Himmelsstoss. We dive into the same dugout, breathless. We are all lying one beside the other, waiting for the charge. When we run out again, although I am very excited, I suddenly think, where's Himmelsstoss? Quickly, I jump back into the dugout and find him with a small scratch lying in a corner, pretending to be wounded. His face looks sullen. He is in a panic. He is new to it, but it makes me mad that the young recruits should be out there and he here. Get out, I spit. He does not stir. His lips quiver. His mustache twitches. Out, I repeat. He draws up his legs and crouches back against the wall and shows his teeth like a cur. I seize him by the arm and try to pull him up. He barks. That is too much for me. I grab him by the neck and shake him like a sack. His head jerks from side to side. You lump, you will get out. You hound, you skunk. Sneak out of it, would you? His eye becomes glassy. I knock his head against the wall. You cow! I lick him from the ribs. You swine! I push him towards the door and shove him out of his head first. Another wave of our attack has just come up. A lieutenant is with him. He sees us and yells, Forward, forward, join in. And the word of command does what all my banging could not. Himmelsstoss hears the order, looks round him as if awakened, and follows on. So in this scene, this is a very important scene. They're in the middle of battle, and Paul is wondering where Kimmich is. Or not Kimmich, he's wondering where Himmelsstoss is. And he looks over and sees that Himmelsstoss has a very small scratch on his face. and he sees that he is just laying there pretending to be injured so that he does not have to fight in battle. When Paul sees that, he becomes absolutely enraged. And he's calling him all these terrible names, and he's so frustrated because Himmelstas, is a former one of his former trainers in boot camp. So he knows about war. And yet there's these really young kids out there who are fighting with having no clue of what to do, and Himmelstas is just laying on the ground and not doing anything to help. And in that instance, Paul becomes very angry. But he gets angry because Himmelstas will not listen to him, and he will only listen when the lieutenant gives them an order. I come after and watch him go over. Once more, he is a smart Himmelstas at the parade ground. He has even outstripped the lieutenant, as he is far ahead. Bombardment, barrage, curtain fire, mines, gas, tanks, machine guns, hand grenades, words, but they hold the horror of the world. Our faces are encrusted. Our thoughts are devastated. We are weary to death. When the attack comes, we shall have to strike many of the men with our fists to waken them and make them come with us. Our eyes are burnt, our hands are torn, our knees bleed, our elbows are raw. How long has it been? Weeks, months, years? Only days. We pass time in the colorless faces of the dying. We cram food into us. We run, we throw, we shoot, we kill. We lie about. We are feeble and spent. And nothing supports us but the knowledge that we are still feebler, still more spent, still more helpless ones there who, with staring eyes, look upon us as gods that escape death many times. So he's kind of saying in this part, as time goes on, we are losing that color, that vibrance in our life. Seeing the faces of the dead, cramming food into our face, shooting, killing are all normal parts of our lives. In the few hours of rest, we teach them. There, see that woggle tap? That's a mortar coming. Keep down. It will go clean over. But if it comes this way, then run for it. We can run from a mortar. We sharpen their ears to the malicious, hardly audible buzz of the smaller shells that are not easily distinguishable. They must pick them out from the general din by their insect-like hum. We explain to them that these are far more dangerous than the big ones that can be heard long before. We show them how to take cover from aircraft, how to simulate a dead man when one is overrun by an attack, how to time hand grenades so they explode half a second before hitting the ground. We teach them to fling themselves into holes as quickly as lightning before the shells with instantaneousness fuses. We show them how to clean up a trench with a handful of bombs. We explain the difference between the fuse length of the enemy bombs and our own. We put them wise to the sound of gas shells. We show them all the tricks that can save them from death. So this is a really good example of comradeship where Paul and the older soldiers are showing and teaching all the younger soldiers kind of the tricks of war. And he's hoping that maybe if he shows them these tricks, it will save them and keep them from dying in war. They listen. They are docile. But when it begins again, in their excitement, they do everything wrong. So he's saying when we explain all this stuff to them, they listen. They are very obedient and compliant. But when they actually have to go do it, they do everything wrong. Hephaestus drags off with a great wound in his back, though which the lung pulses at every breath. I can only pass his hand. It's all up, Paul, he groans, and he bites his arm because of the pain. We see men living in their skulls blown open. We see soldiers run with their 2 feet cut off. They stagger on their splintered stumps in the next shell hole. A lance corporal crawls 1.5 miles on his hands, dragging his smashed knee after him. Another goes to the dressing station, and over his collapsed hand bulges his intestines. We see men without mouths, without jaws, without faces. We find one man who has held the artery of his arm and his teeth for 2 hours in order to not bleed to death. The sun goes down, night comes, the shell winds, life is at an end. Still, the little piece of convulsed earth in which we lie is held. We have yielded no more than a few hundred yards of it as a prize of the enemy. But on every yard there lies a dead man. So I think this is a very important quote when he says, but on every yard there lies a dead man. So he's saying even though we may be gaining, inches or yards, or maybe we are advancing, every time we advance, it will cost someone their life. We have just been relieved. The wheels roll beneath us. We stand dully, and when the call, mind wire, comes, we bend our knees. It was summer when we came up. The trees were still green. Now it is autumn, and the night is gray and wet. The lorries stop. We climb out, a confused heap, a remnant of many names. On either side stand people, dark, calling out the numbers of the brigades and platoons. And at each call, a little group separates itself off, a small handful of dirty, pallid soldiers, a dreadful small remnant. So when he says dirty, pallid soldiers, it's kind of meaning very dull looking, very pale, poor health. Now someone is calling the number of our company. It is, yes, the company commander. He has come through. Then his arm is in a sling. We go over to him, and I recognize Kat and Albert. We stand together, lean against each other, and look at one another. And we hear the number of our company called again and again. He will call a long time. They do not hear him in the hospitals and the shell holes. Once again, second company, this way, and then more softly, nobody else. Second company? He is silent, then huskily he says, "Is that all?" and then gives the order. Number? The morning is gray. It was still summer when we came up, and we were 150 strong. Now we freeze. It is autumn. The leaves rustle. The voices flutter out wearily. 1, 2, 3, 4, and ceased at 32. And there is a long silence before the voice asks, "Anyone else?" And he waits and says softly, "In squads?" And then breaks off and is only able to finish, "Second company," with difficulty. "Second company, march easy." A short line drudges off into the morning. 32 men. So when they are removed from the trenches, they have to go back. And one of the commanders is calling out for the second company. Keeps calling, not realizing that so many of their men had been lost. So he starts counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and then he stops at 32. So originally they had 150 men, and when they came back, there was only 32 men left.